Massive riots and looting have resulted from the recent police killing of an armed Black American man, George Floyd. In the third episode of the Debate Icon series, Nasrudin Rasheed and Mohammed Abdullahi from the University of Nairobi shall be battling the motion, "As the Black community, this house will forgive and move on."
Hello everyone, my name is Aduma Wilkista. I'll be the chair of this panel, along with my co-panelists, and I'd like to invite the proposer to the floor.
So panel, I'll be proposing the motion that reads, massive riots and looting have resulted from the recent police killing of an unarmed Black man, George Floyd. This house, as the Black community, will forgive and move on. So panel, I'll start by raising out the three distinct crimes that come out in this motion. There is a killing of an unarmed Black man, George Floyd. Then there are the riots that follow and the looting which comes from the people taking advantage of the riots. Those are the three crimes. Forgiveness, panel, stems or comes from someone who has suffered a wrong. You must have suffered a wrong for you to be able to be put in the position to either forgive or to seek other forms of remedy. I will equally be telling you why we feel that this burden of forgiving and moving on has been placed on the Black community and why it is the right remedy for them to take. I will equally be arguing that forgiving, just like seeking legal remedy or seeking the killing of the person who killed the Black man or the punishment of the rioters or the looting, is an equal remedy to all those other remedies. That forgiving is equally a remedy to a crime, that it is a remedy to a wrong being suffered. Why is it a justified remedy in this case? I will equally be trying to prove that why should they forgive and why forgiving is the best form of compensation in this instant. Panel, I'll first try and prove that the killing was a wrong suffered by the Black community in general, because one of their own was killed illegally by a policeman who held him down for above 8 minutes, whereas he could not breathe. I will equally be trying to tell you that the riots happened in communities inhabited by Black people. They suffered the effects of the riots. They suffered the effects of the backlash from the police that followed, the battering, the further killings, the further arrest, the tear gas, all of that the Black community suffered equally these damages. I will equally be telling you that because the riots happened in communities inhabited by Black people and the looting that followed, their stores were looted, their premises were destroyed, their police stations, which they equally have a right and claim a right to, were looted. So panel, why is forgiving in this instance better for the Black community? And I'll take the crime of the killing. I think that killing stems from misconduct by the police, or what I would term as vestigial racism. Racism is in its dying stages. However, the remains of that racism brings about misconduct on the part of the police. The policeman has killed. And why is forgiving better? Because we need the police force to continue to serve these communities. We understand that a majority of the crimes being suffered by Black people, it's Black on Black crime. We need these policemen to continue to police our forces. If we bring the attitude of an enemy against the other, we think that those will be detrimental to the Black community in the long run. Why then do we think that other forms of punishment, such as jailing this policeman, will not solve the problem in the long run? We think that there'll be a sense of resentment. This resentment stems from a focarad feeling that because my partner was jailed lifetime, got a lifetime jail term, because he killed a Black man, that resentment, I think, stays in the police force. And when that resentment stays within a community, we think that in the long term, the crime or the problem at the heart of it that we're trying to solve will not be solved. What is the problem we're trying to solve is the vestigial racism. However, we need the police force to continue to combat this vestigial racism. And how do we continue to get the goodwill from the police force if we create the resentment feeling? The resentment feeling stemming from a forecarried feeling of an injustice suffered. We think that when we forgive, the burden is out of the door. No one owes the other anything. We've forgiven you for a crime you've committed against us. You've accepted our forgiveness. You're free to continue to serve in our communities. We think that you should be staying in the police force, and the police force should be rehabilitated from within, and that resentment, when it is not carried forward, then we think that is better in the long term for the black community. Panel. On the issue of the riots, why do we think that forgiving the people who committed those riots is the best form? We think that the riots stem from an anger. And if we punish that anger, we will be punishing the wrong thing. The riots are there because of the anger. Thank you.
I'd like to invite the opposer to take the floor.
Thank you, panel. I am Nasrudin Rasheed, here to oppose the motion that as the black community, this house will forgive and move on. First of all, what does the forgiveness mean? Forgiveness means that the person who has wronged you has accepted that they have wronged you and that they have promised not to repeat past mistakes. That is when you can move. Let me give you an example of truth, justice and reconciliation commissions and processes across the world. First of all, there is truth, acceptance that a wrong has been committed. Then there is justice. Then you reconcile, and that is where the forgiveness part comes in. The proposition has decided to forego the two first critical elements, which is truth and justice, and then skip right ahead to reconciliation, and then believe that miraculously there will be no resentment. What has happened in the past? For us to know what will happen in the future, we have to look at the past. For example, let's go to Los Angeles in 1992, when Rodney King was beaten by the police. What happened when there were no charges against the police who beat him? There were the infamous LA riots of 1992, which were shockingly brutal and violent. This is what happens when you forgive before accepting the truth and before justice has been served. The proposition gives no leeway for any form of justice. They just say, let us forgive and hopefully everything will be wonderful. There will be no resentment. This is not the real world we live in. I will take you later. Anyway, let us look even in the ensuing protests. Why did it turn into a riot? Because the police were weirdly violent to the protesters. That is when the protesters started throwing rocks back at the police. So even the riots, of which he still wants us to forgive, they came as a result because of the police actions, to show you that the police will not change because of forgiveness. However, because we have not forgiven, the following have happened. Even before the forgiveness has happened, the following can be attributed. I will take you later. First of all, there was the firing and charging of all the police officers involved in the recent George Floyd killings. There is a federal investigation by the Department of Justice. There is now renewed political pressure for reform in Congress and change across police departments in America. Also, there have been the firing of police chiefs who oppose reform. Even the police union leaders, some of them have been fired because they oppose reform. Also, technology companies like Microsoft have now started to announce that they will not be selling face recognition software to police departments. Also, the infamous chokehold tactic, of which brought this entire problem, has now been banned by police. Again, there is now a national and a global dialogue on police brutality and police actions. All of these reforms have happened, but the proposition does not give leeway for that. They just say, let's forgive and let us not change anything. How will forgiveness do anything if the same tactics have happened? Let us look at past cases. I will take you later. Let us use the example of Michael Brown and Eric Garner. Nothing changed. Nothing changed. There was forgiveness. Was there truth and justice? No. Eric Garner, the police officers who killed Eric Garner, there was no justice that occurred. They were just given for example, the police who killed Eric Garner, they stayed in the force for 5 more years before they were let go. 5 more years, even after the heinous crime that they committed. This is what happened. But now, because if we give forgiveness before we insist on truth and justice, we will not see any change. What is your POI?
Considering that you make the admission of guilt on the person that has committed the wrong a central point of your argument, don't you think that the charging of those police officers is an admission of guilt?
Guilt does not come when somebody is charged. Guilt comes when the Justice Department when the justice system pronounces somebody as guilty. It does not come just from charging. This is a process which you are skipping again. Also, for example, body cams that the police use, where did this come from? There were protests after the killing of Michael Brown, and then police departments across the United States were mandated to make sure that all officers wear body cams. We did not forget. This came exactly because there were protests during the Michael Brown killing saga, and then the police were pressured. He says that they will reform internally. But where have we seen? All the points I've mentioned, body cams and all the reforms that I've mentioned to you have come because of the pressure from the black community, not because they have forgiven and they have just said the police will be allowed to carry on. Reform comes with pressure, not with forgiveness. Thank you.
At this juncture, I'd like to invite the proposer to make his reply speech.
So panel, we and the opposition agree on a central point, that there is a crime that has been committed and whose immediate actions solve that particular crime. The opposition clearly espouses all of what is happening after the killing and the riots, but none of them are aimed at the root of the crime, at the killing of the crime. He tells you about body cams coming later on. We think that that solves the long term. We think that the forgiving of today is against that crime. And we think that whereas the other option is to go through a criminal trial, and whereas we propose a forgiving option, we prefer the forgiving option for that particular crime. Panel, the opposition tells us that the admission of wrong on the person that has made or committed the wrong is very important. We think that we get that before we come to the forgiving part. We must forgive someone who has accepted that there is a wrong that they have committed. We think that from the actions of the police and from the state of Minnesota, we think that the charging of those police officers, the revamping of the entire police department of the city of Minneapolis, we think that that is an admission of wrong and a guilt. What follows? What do we suggest should follow? Is it a criminal trial versus forgiveness? We suggest forgiveness. Why do we suggest forgiveness? We think that the resentment that comes from a criminal trial, we think that the continual hurt to the black community, because trials will run for a long time. A lot of ugly truths, ugly lies will come out in court. Does that solve the problem of vestigial racism in the long run? We do not think so. We think that resentment is at the heart of vestigial racism in the United States, and we suggest that forgiveness of that particular crime is the better alternative for the black community. Thank you very much.
And without further ado, I'd like to welcome the opposer to make his reply speech.
The proposition in this debate misses the key point behind all these protests and behind all of this saga. What are the protesters on the street calling for? Are they calling for forgiveness, or are they calling for justice? That is what the opposition is bringing to the table. Let there be justice before we can even discuss forgiveness. Justice was denied during the Michael Brown killing. Justice was denied when Eric Garner was killed. Justice was denied during the Rodney King brutal beating. And then nothing changed, which is why we are now discussing the killing of yet another black man. He states that he states that racism is in its dying stages, which he said in his opening remarks, which shows you just how blind the opposition is to the reality on the ground. Racism is not dying. Racism has been institutionalized. It's systemic, and then it is covert. It is not the open racism that used to exist. He is denying that. What are we proposing instead? Let there be a truth, justice, and reconciliation process, which will, if justice is meted out, can lead to talk of forgiveness. He says we need the police right now, and it's true. We're not saying let us not deal with the police, but let the black community and the police go through this truth, justice, and reconciliation process for them to come to a common agreement, for there to not be another George Floyd, for us not to come to this point again. Also, why are we forgiving the rioters? It is a crime that has happened. The proposition seems not to care about justice, and that is what we bring to the table. Again, even in these looters and rioters, remember that there are many white people who are not even part of the black community who have come to loot and riot and then spoil the good image of the black community. Why are we so ready to forgive? If a black man commits a crime, why is that forgiveness not brought about? But when the white do it, we all say, let us now forgive. Let us have a truth and justice reconciliation process. Thank you.